My name is Lauren. I was 24 that year, paralyzed on one side of my leg after a car accident, and completely dependent on my mother after my father passed away. Or more accurately, I lived like a shadow in her house. That morning, the sky over Kentucky was a dull gray, like a damp, moldy blanket. I sat on the edge of the passenger seat in my mom's SUV, a beat up old Ford she kept cleaner than anything else in the house. She didn't turn on the heat, even though it was below 32 degrees outside. I hugged myself, tucking my hands between my thighs for warmth, too afraid to speak. She hated it when I complained. I glanced sideways and saw her jaw clenched, her cheekbones tight. She drove like she was fleeing from something inside her. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. No radio, no noise, just the crunch of tires on gravel and the sound of me swallowing. "Where are we going, Mom?" I asked softly, trying to keep my voice casual. "It's a surprise," she replied flatly, eyes locked on the narrow dirt road ahead. "Trust me." I heard those two words clearly. Trust me. And just as clearly, I felt the sting in my chest. She'd said the same thing when she threw out all my sketches because they were garbage. She'd whispered it too, the day she dropped me off for therapy and never came back for 3 hours. The car turned onto a narrow dirt road flanked by dense pine trees. No signs, no lights. I had no idea where we were. My phone signal had already dropped, and GPS was gone. My chest tightened. I was used to her coldness, but something today felt different. The car stopped abruptly. The jolt sent me forward, banging my head against the dashboard. My mother got out, walked around to my side. Before I could unbuckle, she opened the door and leaned in. "Get out." "What? Mom, what are you doing?" She didn't answer. She grabbed my arm roughly. I tried to resist, but the lower half of my body was too weak. My left knee slammed into the cold ground, wet, muddy. Pain shot from my hip down to my ankle. I gritted my teeth and didn't cry. She tossed my canvas bag onto the dirt, cheap, faded, containing a few clothes, a bottle of painkillers, and an old notebook. "When you stop playing the victim, I'll come back," she said slowly, each word slicing through my ears like a knife. You can't leave me here," I screamed, dragging myself after her as she walked away. "How long are you going to lock yourself in that pathetic role? Take care of yourself, Lauren." The car door slammed. Red taillights flashed briefly through the trees. Then, darkness. I lay there on the frozen ground, my lower body aching, hands trembling from rage and fear. I reached into my jacket, hoping to find my phone. Nothing, she'd taken it. No wheelchair, no emergency meds, no goodbye. Just that bitter, parting shot. I dragged myself out of a shallow patch of mud, my back soaked and freezing. There was still one thing in my pocket. An olive lace handkerchief my cousin Lily had given me when she changed schools. I clutched it, not because I thought it would save me, but because it reminded me that at one time, someone had treated me like a person. The wind hissed through the treetops. The air was thick with the scent of rotting wood and ash. I looked around. Trees and tangled roots like prison bars. The whole forest felt like a trap. I gritted my teeth and began crawling toward a denser patch of trees, hoping to find shelter for the night. I knew there was no use screaming. Who would hear me? But I was wrong. Somewhere in the shadows of the trees, someone was watching me. I had no idea how long I had blacked out. The cold pierced through my thin sweater like needles into bone, numbing my left hand until I could barely feel it. The forest wind at night didn't howl, it whispered in short, sharp bursts like someone murmuring nearby. Every time I dozed off, I startled awake at a rustling in the bushes, sometimes like a small animal, sometimes unmistakably human footsteps, but whatever it was, I couldn't run. I lay there under an old oak tree, my head resting on the canvas bag, trying to hold back tears to stay warm. One of my ankles had swollen badly, and I wasn't sure I'd make it through the night. I thought of my mother's words, "I'll come back when you stop playing the victim." No one was coming back, and this time, I wasn't sure I'd ever get the chance to forgive. Just when I felt like I was about to pass out from exhaustion, I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, behind me. My heart froze. I went completely still. It wasn't an animal. There was intent in that rhythm. Another rustle to my left. I slowly turned my head. A pair of dark boots stood motionless in the shadows just a few feet away, as if the person wearing them was waiting to see how I'd react. I didn't dare call out. I just clutched Lily's lace handkerchief, the only thing left that still held a trace of someone who once cared. Then the figure stepped out from the darkness, tall, wrapped in a thick ash-gray coat. His face was mostly hidden by a hood and an old scarf. He didn't speak. He didn't come too close. He simply took off the backpack slung over his shoulders, pulled out a bottle of water, and set it on the ground within arm's reach. Then he retrieved a flannel coat and gently draped it over my shoulders, his movements steady but not rushed. I looked him straight in the eye, pale gray eyes, calm, showing no fear or panic. I trembled slightly. "Who are you?" No answer. He crouched, gathered a few dry branches around the base of the tree, and started building a fire. Every motion practiced, like he'd done it 1,000 times. In minutes, a small flame was flickering. The warmth on my face was so real it brought tears to my eyes without effort. He handed me a granola bar. I hesitated, then took it. The air around us had softened, though the wind still whispered through the tall pines. We sat there, saying nothing, as if presence alone was enough, no explanation needed. After a while, I tried again. "You live around here? Are you a ranger, a hunter?" Still nothing. He kept his eyes on the fire, narrowing them slightly, as if weighing something unspeakable. Then he stood up, pulled his hood lower, and stepped back into the trees. I opened my mouth to stop him, but my throat was too dry. No sound came out. He didn't look back, didn't leave a word, but the fire kept burning, as if to silently say I wouldn't die tonight. I curled into myself, shaking, but alive. In the orange glow, I looked closely at the coat he had left. It smelled like old firewood and pine sap. On the sleeve, a thin black thread was sewn in. A faded line I couldn't decipher, maybe a name or symbol. I slid my hand into the coat pocket. A small, folded piece of paper was tucked inside. I unfolded it. The handwriting was rough, uneven. Definitely a man's. Silence doesn't mean no one is listening. I read that line over and over all night. I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't know who he was. But one thing was certain. Someone knew I was here, and they didn't want me to die. I sat there until dawn crept gently over the treetops. The fire had died, leaving behind only warm ash, but inside me something had been lit again, a faint spark I thought I no longer deserved to carry. About 30 miles away, inside a cozy Italian restaurant nestled in Lexington's historic district, the chandelier lights glimmered above my mother, Margaret, the woman I once believed was my last refuge after the accident. She sat with her new boyfriend, Ron, a 50-something financial advisor, and my younger brother, Brandon, along with his wife, Madison. They laughed heartily as the waiter brought out Tuscan-style braised veal. Not a single person asked, "Where's Lauren?" No one looked concerned. Madison took a sip of wine and glanced at her phone. "Did she text you?" "She's gone," my mother replied, as casually as if she were referring to someone who had just left a dinner party. Not her disabled daughter she had abandoned in the woods. Same old act, looking for attention. She'll come back when she sees no one cares. Brandon chuckled, patting her on the back. Better go through another drama spiral. Playing the more miserable than everyone card is kind of her specialty. Ron added, tone laced with sarcasm. Honestly, it's one less thing to worry about. With the move coming up, not having Lauren around makes things a lot easier. They raised their glasses. A clink of red wine. Each of their words, a cut, though I wasn't there. And they knew that. While I lay beneath an oak tree, my ankle swollen to my thigh, lips cracked from the cold, my own family called me a drama queen. No missing person report, no news alert, no notice posted. I wasn't lost. I had been deliberately discarded. I didn't know that until 2 days later, when a delivery driver found me by the roadside and took me to the nearest community clinic. When the police arrived, I asked only one question. Did my mom report me missing? The officer, a Puerto Rican man in his 50s named Carlos, looked at me and sighed. No, in fact, she said you ran away. She filed a statement saying you've done this kind of thing before and this was probably the same. I let out a dry laugh, more brittle than the January wind whistling through the clinic windows. Carlos handed me a cup of warm water and gently said, "But something doesn't sit right. I've seen cases like this before, and I just don't believe someone abandons a half-paralyzed daughter in the middle of the woods, in the middle of winter, and calls it finding herself." I didn't respond. I just gripped the edge of the blanket and stared into space. I wasn't surprised, not shocked. There was no kind of pain left in me that felt new anymore. A few days later, when I could finally walk with crutches, I quietly returned to town, not to confront anyone, but to see with my own eyes whether the people I once called family felt anything at all. I stood outside my mother's favorite bakery, the one she visited every Saturday. A small shop, red brick walls, the scent of almond pastries wafting in the breeze. Through the window I saw her sitting with Madison, laughing over something on her phone while nibbling a muffin. No black clothing, no worry lines, no call made to find me. She didn't even wear the ring my dad left behind, the one she always said she only wore when she needed inner strength. I turned away. Another minute of watching them would only weaken me. But just then, something on the bakery's bulletin board caught my eye. A printed invitation card. Saturday night, housewarming party for Margaret and Ron. Farewell Lexington, hello new chapter in Tampa, Florida. They were leaving. No notice sent to me, no goodbye, no address left behind. I had been erased from the story, as if I never existed. A chill ran down my spine. But this time, it wasn't the weather. It was the sharp realization that my mother hadn't abandoned me in some impulsive moment. It was planned, a clean cut, deliberate. And I, the disabled, burdensome daughter, was the final detail they needed to eliminate to start their perfect new life. I stepped back and pulled my old phone from my coat pocket. Though my bank accounts had once been completely under my mother's control, I had kept one thing: a USB drive with years' worth of bank statements. And suddenly I realized if they wanted to erase me from their lives, I was finally ready to write myself back in. I used to think the worst pain was being abandoned by my mother in the cold woods. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. The part beneath, the slow erosion over 24 years, was far more terrifying. It started with small things. So small that if I told anyone, they'd say I was too sensitive. Like this. When I was 12, Mom called the whole family into the living room, her voice dramatic, like she was preparing for a trial. "Who took money from my wallet? $200 just disappeared." Brandon, who was 10 at the time, didn't even look up from his handheld game. I had just walked in, my hands still stained with paint from art class, and before I could say a word, her eyes pinned me. "Don't look around, Lauren. I know it was you. You were home alone this afternoon." I didn't take it. I panicked and stepped back. "I've never touched your wallet." "Then who? The broom? The cat?" I turned to my dad. He was reading the newspaper, as always. Didn't look up. Didn't say a word. The room was silent, except for Mom repeating, "You always make things complicated." Days later, I found the $200 in Brandon's drawer, rolled up and stuffed into an old pencil case. I showed it to Mom. She wasn't mad. She wasn't even surprised. She just said one thing. "But it's still your fault. You make Brandon feel invisible." I froze. That was the first time I realized. To her, I was the root of every problem. Years later, that same pattern repeated. Anytime something went wrong, from a burnt microwave to Brandon getting a bad grade, Mom found a way to blame me. When I tried to defend myself, she'd accuse me of playing the victim. I once scribbled in my journal, "Can anyone hear me? I live here, but no one sees me." And then one day, they did see me, but not to listen. I was 15, coming home from physical therapy, when I noticed the kitchen was unusually quiet. Laughter echoed from the living room. I walked over and froze in the doorway. Madison, who was just Brandon's new girlfriend then, was holding my journal, reading aloud. "I wish someone would ask me, 'Are you okay today?'" she mocked, exaggerating every word like she was doing stand-up comedy. The whole room burst out laughing. Mom was on the couch, wine glass in hand, laughing hysterically. Ron, her then boyfriend, was slapping his knee. "This kid writes her own tragedies?" "No," Madison added, "she's just auditioning for the role of professional victim. Maybe she should apply for a spot on over-emotional teen writers." I couldn't speak. My legs froze. My lips trembled. But the real pain wasn't from them. It came from the far end of the room, where Brandon sat silently, eyes on his phone. He didn't defend me. Didn't say a word. Worst of all, when I walked in, he laughed, too. I snatched the journal from Madison and ran to my room. That night, I ripped out every remaining page and flushed them down the toilet. I never handwrote anything again. They called me too sensitive, said I couldn't take a joke, said I was imagining things. What they didn't realize was that every time they did that, they weren't just hurting me. They were rewriting how I saw myself and how others saw me. Years later, when I applied for an art scholarship in Chicago, Mom sent an email to the admissions board behind my back. In it, she wrote, "My daughter has emotional instability issues. I worry she won't handle the pressure of being away from home." They rejected me 2 weeks later without a word of explanation. I found that email printed out and left in her desk drawer. That was the day I learned not all wounds come from public accusations. Silence, secret sabotage, and carefully planted labels can destroy your self-worth. Without a single blade. 3 days after I was discharged from the clinic, I returned to the trail leading into the forest where my mother had abandoned me. Not to retrieve my belongings, I had nothing worth keeping, but because something inside me still hadn't let go. A part of me was still stuck there, in that cold, unnervingly silent place. And yet, it was the only place I'd ever truly felt seen. I hobbled forward on crutches, one step at a time, along the damp trail covered in decaying leaves. The air smelled of pine sap and dry moss, that wild, earthy scent I would never forget. It felt both raw and comforting, like the night someone had lit a fire beside me. When I reached the same spot, the old oak tree still stood, and the fire pit was reduced to ash. I sat down, leaning against the trunk, feeling the dampness seep through my coat. Then I saw it. A small, folded piece of paper was wedged under a rock near the tree, somewhere I'd definitely missed last time. My heart clenched. I picked it up. The edges were worn, the paper old, but the message inside was perfectly legible. "Lauren, they always wanted you to believe you didn't matter, but you've never been invisible." I looked around. No footsteps, no engines, just the wind rustling dry leaves. Who wrote this? I folded the note and slipped it into the inner pocket of my coat. Then I walked deeper into the woods, guided not by sight but by memory, by something that felt like instinct. About 100 yards in, I came across a small metal box, old and covered in moss, hidden behind a clump of ferns. The lid was hand-engraved with 2 faint words, "Keep going." I sat down and opened it. Inside were scraps of notebook paper, and I recognized the handwriting. It was mine. Snippets from the journal pages I thought I had torn up and flushed away were now here, kept safe, piece by piece. One said, "I've gotten used to not being heard, but I'll never get used to being erased." I wrote that at 17, after my mother disqualified my art competition entry because, in her words, abstract paintings make people uncomfortable. I flipped through more fragments. Some I didn't even remember writing, but they were unmistakably mine. Slanted letters, smudged ink, maybe from tears or sweat, I wasn't sure. But someone had preserved every word. Someone who couldn't bear to let them vanish like my family once wished they would. At the bottom of the box was a newer piece of paper, printed, crisp and clean. We don't choose where we're born, but we do get to choose how we walk forward. Keep walking, Lauren. Someone's still watching over you. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at those words like they were calling to me from another world, a world where I wasn't a shadow, a burden, or the name scratched off a guest list, but a person. Remembered. Protected. I left the box right where I found it, but took everything inside, every proof, every piece of tenderness, with me. On my way back out, I once again heard a rustle in the brush. Not loud, but enough to make me freeze. I turned around. A man stood maybe 60 feet away, beneath an old pine tree. Same worn gray coat, same hooded hat. This time, he didn't hide. We didn't speak. We just looked at each other. I recognized those eyes. He was the one who lit the fire for me that night. He gave a slight nod, then lifted one hand, as if to say, "You're okay now." I took a step forward, but he turned and walked away, calmly disappearing into the woods. Not afraid, not rushed, just gone, as if he'd never been there. But he had. Just like those fragments of memory I thought were lost, just like me, someone finally reappearing in her own story. I don't know who he is, but I know one thing. He saw me, long before I ever knew how to see myself. And that was the first step to truly living. For the very first time, on my own terms. I returned to the forest once more at the end of March, when most of the snow had melted, to find the answer to the question that haunted me every night. Who had kept the fragments of my memories? Who had quietly gathered every page, every word, every wound my family had tried to burn? Following signs of broken branches and a strip of dark fabric snagged on a low branch, I came to a place I hadn't reached on my 2 previous visits. An old ranger station with a slanted wooden roof, shattered windows covered in vines and moss. The front door was ajar. I pushed gently and the hinges groaned dryly. The scent of rotting wood, damp soil, and old smoke hit me, sending chills down my spine. Inside was narrow and dark, with only a dinted wooden table, a chipped stool, and, something that made me freeze, an old laptop sitting in the middle of the table, connected to a solar panel placed near the window. The screen was still on, the battery was still working. I stepped closer, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. On the screen was a blog interface. The page title held just one line, in default font. No one listened, so I did. I clicked on the latest post. The day she was left behind, no one knew, no one wanted to know. They called her a burden, but I call her a survivor. I took a half step back. My hands trembled. I clicked the next post. When she was accused of stealing $200, no one questioned her little brother. I know because I saw Lauren crying behind the library that day, her hands still smudged with paint. I couldn't breathe. How could this person know that? I kept scrolling. Each post was a puzzle piece of my life, from little things like me hiding sketches under my pillow, to moments no one else had witnessed, like my mother grabbing my wrist tightly after my 16th birthday party and hissing, "You exhaust people, Lauren." The writer never used their name. Every entry was in third person, calling me she, as if narrating a tragic novel. But every line, every detail, was me. One post described the scar on the back of my neck, something I never told anyone about because I was ashamed it came from being pushed out of a grocery cart as a toddler. One post contained only a single sentence. The one who saves the little things is the one who truly sees you. I cried. This person hadn't just recorded, they had protected me through words, memory, and a loyalty I had never received from my own family. At the bottom of the page, I found the About section. No photo, no name, just one line. She didn't need saving. She just needed someone who wouldn't pretend not to see her. I sank to my knees, still holding onto the table like it was something real, something solid. I didn't know who created this blog, but they had been watching me for years, silently, patiently, asking for nothing. Then I saw it, a hidden link in tiny print at the bottom, admin access, no password required. I clicked it. A list appeared. Over 300 posts uploaded over the past 6 years, each one tagged. School, mom, brother, birthday night, old journal, accident, ruined sketch, abandonment. My hands turned cold. No one could have recorded this unless they were there, witnessing, closer than I ever imagined. A new tab opened automatically, a draft post, saved just 2 hours ago. She came back to the forest today. I saw her standing at the old spot. She's stronger now. I thought I wouldn't need to write anymore, but today I saw her smile, really smile, for the first time in years. Maybe I can stop being afraid of getting it wrong, because she's writing her story now. I stared at the screen, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel weak. I felt seen by someone who didn't offer hollow comfort or pat my shoulder, but who had quietly turned what I once called pain into something that could be understood. I looked around the room, then back at the screen. The blog's title still glowed. No one listened, so I did. And for the first time in my life, I whispered something that had always felt too luxurious to say. Thank you for listening. The exhibition, titled Silent Voices, was held at a small gallery in downtown Cincinnati, organized by a nonprofit aiming to showcase anonymous works by artists who survived psychological or domestic abuse. Each piece was displayed without a name or biography, just a coded signature assigned by the founder. I submitted my piece in silence under the ID code LL23, short for my name, Lauren Jane, with the description, "A memory buried alive, an identity rewritten." The painting I sent was called The Glass Memory, a cold lit room with a girl curled up in the center, surrounded by hundreds of shattered mirrors. On each mirror was a phrase, "Don't act weak. You're being dramatic. No one's going to believe you." I painted it with my recovering right hand, trembling with every stroke. I balanced the light and shadow using memory and instinct. Because I no longer keep notes, I don't need to write down the pain I painted. I didn't tell anyone, didn't invite anyone, but the world has its own way. When the exhibition opened on Saturday afternoon, I stood in a shadowy corner near the emergency exit, hair tied low, a beige knit cap, and a thick secondhand coat that let me blend into the crowd. I thought I was ready, until I saw them. My mother, Margaret, in her ivory charity club coat, came in with Ron and Brandon, my brother. They sipped wine, strolled past each painting with that smug, casual air. I froze when I saw Madison with them. Same confident smile, same glance that treated the art like decor for her narrative. They didn't recognize me. I don't blame them. The person they once knew was someone they'd already broken with their own hands. I watched them from a distance, their steps, their smirks, until they stopped in front of the glass memory. Madison spoke first. "This one looks kind of familiar." Brandon nodded. "Feels like the stuff Lauren used to paint, right?" Ron shrugged. "That girl, she can't even draw anymore, can she?" My mother said nothing. She stood still, staring at the painting longer than anyone. Her hand clenched the strap of her purse. When her eyes dropped to the small caption in the corner, "An identity rewritten, rewritten," I saw her mouth twitch. Right then, a microphone came on in the center of the gallery. "Thank you all for attending Silent Voices, and now, as promised, we'll be revealing the names of some featured artists whose work stood out this week." Murmurs filled the room. I swallowed hard. My back was damp with sweat. The host stepped up to my painting. The crowd leaned in. My heart felt pulled tight by invisible thread. This piece. The Glass Memory has been one of the most talked about works of the week, and today the artist has agreed to reveal her name. Please welcome. He paused. I stepped forward. Lauren Jane Whitmore. Silence fell. Like the oxygen had been sucked from the room. Brandon dropped his wine glass. Ron froze. Madison stepped back. And my mother, she didn't blink. Her entire body locked up, her eyes widened, not from shock, but from rage. I stood tall, eyes steady. You once said, "No one listens to my story." I looked at each of them. Tonight, they didn't just listen. They watched for 20 straight minutes without looking away. No one replied. Then, strangers in the room started clapping. Not loud, not dramatic, just small, real claps from people who knew how silence can be distorted. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked toward the door. Before I left, I looked back one last time. My mother's eyes were bloodshot, but as always, she said nothing. The only difference was, this time, I no longer needed anything from her, because now my voice is finally loud enough, without needing permission to be heard. 3 weeks after the exhibition, I received an email from a nonprofit organization called Canvas and Courage, dedicated to supporting abused children through art therapy. The sender was Mrs. Helen Moore, the program director, who had attended the opening night of The Glass Memory. She wrote simply, "I didn't know who you were before that night, but I know for sure. There are children out there who need to be seen, just like you once did. If you're willing, we're ready to give you a room, a box of paints, and a chance to begin again. Not for revenge, but for survival." I read that email 3 times before replying with a single word: yes. The center was located in a repurposed church building in the suburbs of Dayton, Ohio. The room I was assigned had once been a Bible study classroom, now painted in soft pastels, with tiny string lights twinkling overhead like stars. I personally hung a few small paintings on the wall, unsigned, only titles. "Waiting to be seen. No one can block me now. There's still light." The first session had only 6 children, 4 girls, 2 boys. Ages ranged from 6 to 11. Most were quiet. Some just stared at the table or kept drawing circles over and over. I didn't push them. I knew too well what it felt like to be forced to share. Instead, I simply said, "Here, you can draw whatever you want. No one will laugh, no one will snatch your paper, no one will tear your picture." A 9-year-old girl named Abby, with twin braids, handed me her first drawing. It showed a plain kitchen, a large refrigerator pushed against the wall. Behind the fridge was a small, warped brown spot. "What's this, Abby?" I asked gently. She looked around, lips tightly pressed. After a moment, she whispered, "It's me, hiding." I sat beside her, staying quiet for a few seconds. Then I placed my hand next to the paper. "What if you stepped out from behind there?" Abby looked at me. Then she picked up a yellow crayon and drew a big circle in the corner of the page. No label. But I knew that was the sun. I could barely breathe in that moment, not from pain, but because, for the first time, I truly felt healing doesn't come from making others pay. It comes from seeing a child who once had their dreams stolen begin to dream again. I began teaching 3 days a week. I didn't call it a class. I called it breathing time with colors. Every child had their own sketchbook, locked away, only they and I could touch it. There was a 7-year-old boy named Eli who hadn't spoken a word during 3 months of treatment. That day, he gently placed my hand on a page he had just drawn, a simple 4-corner house with words written in slanted print. "No yelling here." I smiled at him and whispered, "That's a real home." And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't angry anymore, not at my mother, not at Brandon, not at Madison, or anyone who once tried to twist me into a shadow of myself. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need them to break down or pay, like people imagine justice must look. Because if I had to choose between hurting them or helping these children believe they deserve to live, I'd choose the second. Every single day. One Friday afternoon, while cleaning up, I found an envelope taped under a cloth chair by the easel. No name. Inside, a note. I'm still watching, but this time from behind the safe walls you built. Thank you for not staying silent like they wanted. I smiled. I didn't know who sent it. Maybe it was him, the stranger in the woods. Maybe it was someone who passed through my life without me noticing. Whoever it was, I didn't need to know anymore. Because I wasn't chasing who saw me. I was the one doing the seeing now, and that was enough. I locked the room and stepped into the hallway, where the sunset turned old tiles golden. I wasn't walking away from the past. I was walking forward, hand in hand with the future, and this time, it wasn't trembling in the dark. It was holding my hand tight, painting its colors boldly on clean white paper. Lauren's story reminds us that healing doesn't begin with the forgiveness of those who hurt us. It begins the moment we dare to face ourselves and choose to move forward, even when no apology comes, even when recognition never arrives. Healing isn't forgetting. It's turning memory into foundation for a new life. And sometimes the most profound answer to pain is using it to guide someone else toward their own light. What do you think of Lauren's journey? If it were you, would you choose to forgive or to walk away? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories about family, pain, and the journey toward healing.